What happens when you build an entire town in a place that was never meant to support life? It sounds a little backwards, but the American desert is full of places like that. In broad daylight, everything is fully exposed. Old houses, empty roads, once luxurious hotels, neon signs still trying to glow in the middle of almost endless space. There is nowhere to hide, and because there is nowhere to hide, you start noticing everything. These places were once boom towns, resort towns, railroad stops, or roadside lifelines along Route 66. They were filled with people, money, movement, and belief. But now what remains are the shapes of a former life, sitting in the heat like witnesses too exhausted to keep explaining what happened. In this video, we are going through 10 towns like that, not to find ghosts, but to look at places that were left behind, and ask why they feel more unsettling than any ghost story you have ever heard. Number 10. Tonopah, Nevada. Tonopah is the kind of town that it makes you feel the moment you arrive, like Google Maps owes you a quiet apology. This place exploded after silver was discovered in 1900, then got rich so fast that Nevada once recognized it as the richest silver producer in the nation, with a peak population of around 10,000. Sounds like a Wild West dream, right? The kind of place that used to pull silver out of the ground faster than most people could dig up hope. But like a lot of mining towns, once the rush was over, what stayed behind was not just history. It was the feeling that everything was still standing, but the soul had moved out a long time ago. What makes Tonopah unsettling is that it is not fully dead. It is still alive, just not in any normal way. On one side, you have the heavy weight of mining history. On the other, you have the Clown Motel, which looks like someone took a childhood fear, added neon, and turned it into a tourist destination. And right next to it sits Old Tonopah Cemetery. Yes, a clown motel beside a graveyard. That is not town planning. That is a nightmare with a marketing budget. Old Tonopah Cemetery was established in 1901 and only operated for about 10 years. According to the town's official website, it still contains more than 300 graves. But the creepiest detail is not the old headstones. It is why the cemetery stopped being used, not because it ran out of room, not because people wanted something more respectable, but because mining tailings from the Tonopah extension mine kept washing down and damaging the graves and markers. In other words, the mining industry that once fed the town eventually came back and started chewing on the dead. It feels like one of history's cruelest plot twists. And things get even stranger when you learn that only about 30% of the headstones are original. The rest were reconstructed through later historical research. Some grave locations even had to be identified with dowsing rods before the real cemetery map was eventually found in an attic in Round Mountain. That is why this cemetery is not just scary because it is old. It is scary because it feels like a memory that got crushed, buried, and then pieced back together by people trying to rebuild a story the land itself never wanted to tell all the way through. Number 9. Jarbidge, Nevada. Jarbidge is not the kind of town that scares you with collapsing buildings or empty streets. It gets under your skin in a different way, the kind of way where you stand in the middle of a canyon and feel like you're in the wrong place. Like this land has had an owner for a very long time, and humans are just late arrivals who stayed long enough to start acting like they belong. According to Travel Nevada, Shoshone legend says this area was once the territory of Sahobits, a man-eating giant that hunted people who wandered off. Hearing that and still deciding to come here and start mining for gold in 1909 is, honestly, a very committed form of frontier optimism. And then they went one step further and named the place after the creature, with the pronunciation gradually shifting into Jarbidge. Plenty of towns have names that sound poetic. This one sounds like a warning nobody bothered to read carefully. And that is the part that really makes it unsettling. Sahobits is not a ghost, not a spirit, not a demon, not the kind of thing people tell stories about for fun and then go to bed. It is a living creature. It has a body, it has strength, it can hunt. That makes it feel more real, and because of that, more disturbing. A ghost at least leaves room for doubt. This feels more like the kind of thing where if it does exist, you are not in much of a position to negotiate. The folklore does not describe it in neat movie monster detail. There is no fixed face, no standard shape, nothing conveniently clear. All people really say is that it was huge, several times larger than a man, fast in rough terrain, able to hunt without tools, and capable of appearing and vanishing in the canyon. Which sounds exactly like the kind of thing that would make you turn around on a trail and immediately wonder whether turning around again would somehow make things worse. So Jarbidge does not feel like an abandoned town. It feels like a place where humans are renting space from something older. They have just been there so long they forgot the arrangement. But from the name to the legend behind it, everything here seems to whisper the same thing. This place never really belonged to you. And if something does still live in that canyon, you are probably not very high on its list of concerns. Number 8. Amboy, California. Amboy is the kind of town that teaches you a very American lesson right away. Some places do not die from natural disaster, and they do not die from war. They die because the highway changed its mind. This place started as a railroad stop in 1883, then really took off when Route 66 opened in 1926. By 1938, Roy's began as a small gas station and eventually grew into a gas station, cafe, and motel complex in the middle of the Mojave Desert. Sounds impressive, but Amboy was fragile from the very beginning. It did not live on mining, it did not live on farming, it lived on passing traffic. Put bluntly, this was the kind of town where if the road kept breathing, the town kept breathing. And if the road flatlined, the town went with it. Roy's official site calls Amboy a tiny town. And tiny here does not mean postcard cute. It means so small that its existence almost entirely depended on how many drivers felt like easing off the gas that day. When Route 66 became famous, Amboy and towns like it boomed right along with it. Roy's and the town itself were once operating nearly 24/7 to serve travelers. By around 1940, Amboy's population reached about 65 people. That sounds tiny, sure, but in the middle of the desert, that was enough to pretend you were a real community. Then Interstate 40 opened, and that was basically a death sentence poured in concrete. The town's owner at the time said revenue went down to zero. The very day I-40 opened, not dropped sharply, not slowly declined, just zero. Colder than a layoff email. Today, Roy's is still there with its 50-foot googie neon sign tall enough to be seen from far away. And that is what makes the place so sad. It sits in the middle of Mojave Trail's National Monument, surrounded by such a vast stretch of desert that the sign looks like it is still trying to call customers back to a party that ended decades ago. Amboy now has almost no stable resident population left. Sometimes it is described as having only a handful of people, sometimes even fewer than the number of people waiting for coffee at an ordinary gas station. This is not really a town anymore. It is a glowing sign pretending the past never left. Number 7. Bombay Beach, California. Bombay Beach is not scary in the usual haunted hallway 3 a.m. knocking kind of way. It is scary in a way that is much worse. Everything here is dying very slowly, very publicly, and with absolutely no interest in pretending otherwise. The town sits along the Salton Sea, about 223 feet below sea level, and by 2020, its population was down to just 231 people. That sounds less like a town and more like the head count for a medium-sized apartment building. But that is only the beginning. What makes Bombay Beach unsettling in such a sad way is that it was never supposed to become a wreck. It used to be a real resort destination. Back when the Salton Sea was booming, especially in the 1950s and 1960s, the area was known for boating, fishing, water skiing, camping, and lakeside vacation life. California State Parks describes the Salton Sea as once being a hugely popular destination with around 130 miles of shoreline. In other words, this place was once seen as the desert's version of a waterfront getaway. Then Time looked at it, gave a little smirk, and walked off. Bombay Beach did not die in one dramatic collapse. It died the way a lot of modern American places do. Ecological crisis, failing infrastructure, and then a slow public adjustment where people start using technical terms to make disaster sound less personal. California's Salton Sea program says that as inflow dropped, the sea began shrinking, growing saltier, and exposing old lake bed that can release dust. The USGS describes almost the exact same chain reaction. Less incoming water, lower water levels, rising salinity, declining fish and bird habitat, and exposed lake bed becoming a source of dust that affects air quality. In short, the sea is not just dying, it is leaving its skeleton out in the open. And that is what really gets under your skin about Bombay Beach. As the water pulls back, what remains is not beautiful nostalgia. It is dust, salt, decay, and the feeling that the whole town has been left sitting inside a very long, very visible collapse. A 2024 report from the Salton Sea program says current projects are focused on dust suppression, and some monitoring stations have recorded more than a 95% drop in dust emissions after intervention. That sounds positive, sure, but when a place has to celebrate the fact that less toxic dust is blowing around, that already tells you Bombay Beach is living inside a story no one would call normal. Number 6. Bisbee, Arizona. Bisbee is the kind of town that looks artsy and vintage during the day, the kind of place that photographs extremely well and seems very committed to pretending it has always been elegant. But at night, especially when you look at the steep streets, the narrow alleys, the old hotels, and Brewery Gulch lit up after dark, it starts to feel like the whole town is dressing up nicely to distract you from a past that was a little much. And honestly, with Bisbee's mining history, a little much is still being polite. Over nearly a century of extraction, Bisbee produced close to 8 billion pounds of copper, 102 million ounces of silver, and 2.8 million ounces of gold. At that point, this is no longer just a mining town, this is the kind of place that practically pulled an entire mountain apart and turned it into cash. Copper Queen Mine and the Lavender Pit helped make Bisbee one of the biggest copper centers in Arizona. Meanwhile, Old Bisbee sits at around 5,300 feet, wedged into the narrow valleys of the Mule Mountains, so the town's layout looks like it was designed with sheer stubbornness and an unhealthy love of staircases. Houses cling to hillsides, streets tilt like they have personal issues, alleys are narrow. Historic buildings are packed together like everyone wanted a place in town, but nobody was in the mood to share. Walking through it feels like the whole town was designed by a mountain goat with strong opinions about mining-era architecture. The funny part is that Bisbee doesn't even try to erase that past. It puts the past on display, lights it up, sells tickets, and adds just enough art to take the edge off the smell of ore. The city has public art projects, and the Bisbee Mining and Historical Museum is a Smithsonian affiliate, which means its industrial history didn't just get buried under dust. It got repackaged into storytelling, exhibits, and tourism. Basically, yes, this place used to be intense. Please enjoy the gift shop. And of course, a town like this was never going to stop at history tours. Bisbee doesn't just have a ghost tour, it has a whole after-hours haunted menu. The Arizona Office of Tourism mentions the Old Bisbee Ghost Tour, while Discover Bisbee also promotes U.S. Ghost Adventures and Bisbee After Dark. In other words, Bisbee is the kind of town that spent years mining the mountain for money, and now it's mining its own unease to keep selling tickets. Honestly, that is a pretty impressive business model. Number 5. Pioche, Nevada. Pioche is the kind of town that makes you realize the Wild West wasn't just a branding concept for t-shirts. It was real chaos, real dirt, real danger, and probably exhausting just to survive week by week. Silver was discovered here in 1864, but it wasn't until 1869 that mining really took off and Pioche exploded into a full-blown mining town. Just about 3 years later, the area had produced over $5 million in ore. Sounds like a jackpot. But in the Old West, whenever money started flowing that fast, bullets usually moved even faster. And Pioche lived up to that reputation. The town is famous for a line repeated by both the Pioche Chamber and Travel Nevada. 72 men were killed with their boots on before anyone died a natural death. Put plainly, before this place even had a chance to function like a normal community, it had already mastered dying like a battlefield. People didn't get the chance to grow old, they got shot. They didn't build stable lives, they became stories. At that point, this isn't just mining history. It's the history of a place where human life seemed cheaper than a bad hand of cards. Then you get to Murderer's Row, and things somehow get even harder to shake off. This section holds the graves of over 100 accused killers. Many graves have no markers at all, while others state the cause of death in a way that feels almost cold. Shot in the back during an ambush, killed over arguments so small you almost want to ask, that was enough to end someone? But in Pioche, the answer seems to have been yes, very much yes. Today, Pioche still sits there like a small town tucked into dry hills, with its old main street, historic facades, hillside cemetery, and an atmosphere that feels like time walked by and decided not to interfere. It's not completely ruined like a ghost town where you can comfortably file it away as the past, but it's not clean or polished enough to erase what happened either, and that in-between state is what makes it unsettling. Alive enough that people are still telling the stories. Old enough that every story sounds like a confession that never fully stayed buried. Number 4, Rhyolite, Nevada. Rhyolite is the kind of town that makes you realize a harsh truth. Not every dream dies because it's poor. Some dreams die because they believed in themselves way too fast. This place formed after gold was discovered in 1904, then exploded in early 1905. Within just a few years, it had electricity, running water, telephones, newspapers, a hospital, schools, an opera house, and even a stock exchange. In other words, Rhyolite had no interest in staying a dusty mining camp. It wanted to skip steps and become a modern city, like signing up for a marathon before learning how to walk. And it really did grow that fast. The National Park Service notes that in January 1905, it started as a camp of just 2 people. 2 weeks later, there were already about 1,200. By June, the population hit around 2,500. At that point, this wasn't growth anymore. It was a collective fever wearing a city costume. A whole group of people looked at desert, rock, and gold and basically said, yeah, this is definitely the future. The American West has seen plenty of bold decisions, but Rhyolite feels like a bet placed after 3 cups of strong coffee and absolutely no one reading the fine print. What makes Rhyolite sad and honestly a little unsettling is that it didn't fail like some unknown struggling camp. It failed like a civilized dream. Most ghost towns feel like they were poor from the start, temporary, just trying to survive day by day. Rhyolite was different. It truly believed it would grow, stabilize, and become something real. That's why when the concrete walls of places like Cookbank or the school are still standing out there in the desert, you don't just see ruins. You see a modern plan that snapped halfway through, like someone started building a future city and suddenly lost confidence before putting on the roof. And then there's the bottle house, which somehow feels both funny and a little desperate. A house built from around 50,000 glass bottles, often described as the best preserved example of its kind in Nevada. By 1925, it was even restored by famous players Lasky, the parent company of Paramount for filmmaking, which is kind of ironic. A town that once dreamed of becoming a real city ended up becoming a perfect movie set instead. Like it couldn't survive its dream in real life, so it kept going by playing one on screen. Number 3, Goldfield, Nevada. Goldfield is the kind of town that makes you realize the gold rush didn't just dig into the ground. It dug straight into people's common sense. After gold was discovered in the early 1900s, this place exploded fast, becoming the largest boomtown in Nevada, with a population often cited around 20,000 at its peak. The surrounding mines alone pulled in over $80 million in gold during its golden years. Put simply, Goldfield wasn't just rich, it was the kind of rich that made other towns question their life choices. And when a town gets rich that fast, it usually starts acting like it's going to live forever. So Goldfield was no exception. It didn't just mine gold. It built an image. It created a downtown flashy enough to prove that even in the middle of the desert, people could play aristocrat. The clearest example is the Goldfield Hotel, a name that basically swallowed the town's entire folklore. According to Travel Nevada, it sat right at the center, built during Goldfield's peak, with 154 rooms, electricity, telephones, heating, mahogany interiors, gold leaf ceilings, crystal chandeliers, and even a high-speed elevator considered cutting edge for the West at the time. Let's be honest, this wasn't just a hotel, this was a gold rush in a suit. And that's exactly why, when the town started fading, the Goldfield Hotel began to feel like something too grand to be abandoned properly. It became nationally known not for its history, but for ghost stories, paranormal shows and rumors, crying sounds, the smell of tobacco, a woman named Elizabeth, and whatever else people felt like adding to the script. But the real strength of Goldfield is that you don't even need those stories to feel uneasy. The building itself does most of the work. A place that once looked this confident, this excessive, now sitting in a half-faded boomtown, practically invites people to fill the silence with something. Goldfield isn't just unsettling because of ghost stories. It's unsettling because it's still standing there as a monument to ambition that dressed itself a little too well. Number 2. Pioneertown, California. Pioneertown is the kind of place that makes you realize something a little off. Some places aren't fake because they fell apart. They were built fake from the very beginning. It was designed as a Wild West movie set, and to this day it still carries that exact vibe. Which means when you walk in, you're not stepping into a town that grew naturally. You're stepping into something designed to look like a town. Sounds similar, feels completely different. At the center of it all is Main Street, and honestly the name alone gives it away. It's a wordplay on Main Street, so swapped out for Maine like a horse's mane. Cute, very cowboy, but also feels like the town is winking at you. Yeah, I know I'm a performance. The wooden facades, the bank, the bathhouse, the stables. Everything was built for the camera, not for life to grow into. Let's be honest, this is a town constructed out of good camera angles, not actual human needs. And that's where it starts to feel uncomfortable. During the day, everything looks great. Very Wild West, very postcard. The kind of place where you take a photo and people assume you just walked off a movie set. But that's exactly the problem. It's a little too right. Like someone smiling so perfectly, you start wondering how long they've been holding that expression. Then the light starts to drop and the whole place changes tone. The wooden facades lose depth. The saloon signs start looking like props that forgot to go home. The empty street feels wider than it should, and the desert silence makes every small sound feel slightly wrong. That's when the uncomfortable question kicks in. Are you standing in a real town or inside an idea of one? Pioneertown doesn't scare you in the usual way. Nothing's chasing you, nothing jumps out. It gets under your skin in a different way. It makes you question whether what you're looking at is real at all, and honestly, that feeling can be a lot more unsettling than seeing something you can clearly explain. Number 1. Bodie, California. Bodie is not the kind of ghost town with a couple of rotting wooden shacks that people exaggerate just to make it sound creepy. No, this place was a real boomtown, big enough to make people believe it would last forever. According to the National Park Service, Bodie exploded after a major gold discovery in 1876. At its peak around 1879 to 1880, the town had about 8,000 people and roughly 2,000 structures. Put simply, this wasn't some minor historical footnote. This was a full-blown collective frenzy, people building homes, streets, and ambition in a place that offered almost nothing except gold and illusion. What makes Bodie more unsettling than most ghost towns isn't that it died. It's that it never disappeared cleanly. Around 110 buildings are still standing in and around the town. And the creepiest part is that many interiors remain almost exactly as they were left. Furniture, bottles, everyday items still sitting there like someone just walked out and never came back. That's what makes Bodie uncomfortable. Most ghost towns are just architectural skeletons. Bodie still has the skin of everyday life. It doesn't feel finished. It feels abandoned mid-sentence. And history didn't even leave it alone after that. In 1932, a massive fire destroyed much of what remained of the downtown area. So what you see today isn't the full Bodie. It's what survived after the town had already declined and then got cut down again by fire. Like time looked at it and thought, not quite brutal enough, and decided to go for one more round. Then there's the Bodie curse. Management today may not push it as a tourist gimmick anymore, but the warning remains. Don't take anything, don't move anything. And honestly, Bodie doesn't need ghost stories to make people hesitate. The feeling here is simple. Everything still belongs to a life that was never fully closed. Touching anything in Bodie doesn't feel like picking up an old object. It feels like disturbing the leftover pieces of a story the town itself refuses to let end. And those were the 10 creepiest desert towns in America. But what makes these places unsettling isn't ghosts or legends. It's something more real. The feeling that some places once lived intensely and then faded so slowly you can still see what's left behind. The streets, the houses, the sign, everything is still there. It's just that life didn't stay with them. If you ever find yourself standing in a place like this, the question isn't, is something here? It's, where did everything that used to be here go? What do you think? Out of these 10 towns, which one made you the most uncomfortable? And if you're into this kind of content, don't forget to subscribe, because there are a lot more places out there that look completely normal until you start hearing the story behind them.